Hello, and welcome to afaqs CMO Dialogues, where we speak to senior marketing executives and pick their brains about all things marketing and find out what they think about the latest trends in marketing. Today, we have with us Anoop Manohar, the Chief Marketing Officer at Axis Bank. He has over 22 years of experience in sales and marketing and has worked at Hindustan Unilever, the Coca-Cola Company, before joining Axis Bank about 3 years ago. While he now works on a BFSI brand, a chunk of his experience lies in the FMCG space across categories like laundry and household care, dairy, coffee, and even premium water. Welcome, Anoop.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that introduction.
22 years is a long time, Anoop. Uh, how have things changed? What has, the shape of the whole sales marketing ecosystem, how has it changed in the last 2 decades or so?
I think the first thing that has changed is the thing that's changed all our lives actually, the internet. I think the second thing that's recently changed our lives is the mobile phone and how easy it is to access a screen and information for the consumers. And because of those changes in our environment, I think for marketers, the big change, and I say this all the time, it's very boring, is that we used to be people who talk to audiences and customers. Now those customers and audiences are no longer audiences, right? They can talk back to you, and they can actually let you know what they think about your campaign. If you're not being authentic, they will call you out. If they've had a bad service experience or a good service experience, they can come back and tell you this is what happened. And there's a big feedback loop now coming back to marketers. So I think that's the first big change. Uh, it's not one-way communication; it's two-way. And I think as marketers, if we recognize that, it's also a big opportunity because um, here is an opportunity to actually be talked about, or your brand to be talked about when you're not in the room, right? So if you have the right kind of conversations with your customers, even your non-customers, what they say, word of mouth, as we used to call it, right, is actually driven a lot more nowadays with people who you don't even know, right? So you might not know them, but their experience, if you go to a tool like Quora, where you look for it, or Google, there are forums, there are groups, right? On social, there are groups there as well. So all of that, I think, has changed the whole context of how we operate in marketing. I think the other big changes in the business of marketing because of data and how we can now target customers in a much more nuanced manner. There is the business of marketing has become a bit more sharper. So you will see, I think there's generally some conversations around, is marketing still the same? Is performance marketing real marketing, or is there a space for above the line marketing? Those kind of debates have started happening. In my view, it's marketing is still marketing. It's just that we have new tools. But those would be the two big meta things that I would think have changed in the last few years.
These things that you have identified, both the talking back from the consumer and technology piece, etc. Anything where you have used either of these elements, or maybe something else from longer ago, a memorable campaign you have worked on?
Sure. So I think at the base of marketing, the fundamentals are still the same. You need to talk to the customer, understand them, and kind of explain to them why your product is great, right? And then leave it up to their choice. So for me, I think besides that, the campaign that I'm really excited about recently that we did was in Axis was this campaign on a mobile banking app. So if you followed our brand, uh, we've been a brand that's got this philosophy of Dil Se Open, and it's in our view our single biggest differentiator in the BFSI category, which is a very left brain logical kind of a category. Here we have this positioning that comes from our people, which is about the fact that we have human qualities, which is we are warm, we are open, we are empathetic, and therefore we are an accessible brand, right? So the challenge that we had was as times have moved, so we made this promise saying that they'll say open. I think our previous campaign was about the fact that the lengths to which our employees would go so that you, the consumer, has a great experience with the bank. Here the challenge was, okay, we have an app. We are really proud of our app. It's one of the highest rated apps in banking in the world, arguably, with a 4.8 rating on both Google Play Store and on the Apple ecosystem. We had to talk about this app. Now, the great thing about the app is it actually translates some of those experiences that you would have had at the branch uh, into high quality digital experiences, right? So you can access that sitting at your home or in your office through the app. So the first thing that we had to do is name the app. And if you look at a lot of the apps in the category, the names are actually very different from the parent brand, right? So any bank you can think of, the bank's name might be X, the app's name is Y, which is quite different from what the perception of the bank is, right? We went the other way and we decided to integrate it into our ecosystem of brands, and therefore we called it Open by Axis Bank. And it solved two problems. Uh, one is obviously it's a great tool for a marketer to have something, an app that's called Open. Secondly, it's in line with our bank philosophy. Thirdly, we know that our digital teams actually put in a lot of effort and thought into it so that this app is intuitive, right? And I'm saying, let's say, an old school thing of you have to order your checkbooks. I don't think a lot of people order their checkbooks anymore. But previously, you had to go and do it. Here, the app will remind you, saying, "Listen, we know the leaves you probably at the end of your thing," and then we would queue that. So really, the app is about solving the problems, the real life problems that consumers experience in the banking sector, and that's the approach we took when we put this campaign out, and we've had great results after putting it out. So that's maybe it's a recent memory and maybe it's recency bias, but that's one of the things that I'm really proud of. This is not classical marketing, right? This is something our digital team is doing, but it is marketing at the end of the day. So, for example, if you see a huge credit in your account, let's say you got your incentive, assuming that the app has the ability to say, "Oh, listen, these are the investment options. We see that you've got a credit," and it can have that conversation with you without being too intrusive, right? So again, being at the right place in the consumer's life at the right time is what this enables.
Such a long career, and in general, we learn from mistakes, right? So I also want to know, other than a memorable campaign you worked on, something that you did that failed spectacularly, but you learned something from it.
Yeah, sure. So this is a campaign I was working in innovation in the hydration and sports category in my previous organization. And we had launched this drink that was I think in India it's called an energy drink, but a glucose-based drink, right? And as we were trying to build, so we thought it was a great product, had all the right reasons to believe, etc. But when we went to try and advertise it or speak to the consumer, what we realized is that Indian consumers called everything loosely energy drinks, right? So whether it's a hydration drink or a glucose-based drink or a caffeine-based drink, it was just clumped together as energy-based drinks. And in a weird sort of way, all of these things do the same thing. They give you a lift, and then you're able to do more things. And because of our belief in the product, we said, okay, this works. It also gets absorbed in your body quickly. Is something that we had worked on in the formulation. We tried to put together communication that said this, right? But it was very simplistic at the end of the day. We were saying that you have this, it gives you a boost, and therefore you should buy it, right? And once we put out the communication, we realized that this is the most generic communication we could do because everybody else is saying the same thing, right? While we might have said it in a different style from our competitors, we were we were we were saying essentially what the consumer already knew of the category, and therefore we were not standing out as different versus everybody else. And for me, that was obviously a campaign from which we learned from. We then went back to the drawing board. Can I also tell you what we did next? So it's not all lost. So instead of it being focused on individual, right? I think this is a great line that the creative guy used. When we next crafted the communication, we said, this is going to, we did a bit more deeper work. This is going to that guy who's the daily wage earner, or somebody who's on the street, or what we used to call India C in that, right? And while individually he needs energy, the insight that we got was that he gets a lot of energy from his community, his family, his friends, right? And if as you go down pop strata, it's not as individualistic as it is at the top. And instead of making the drink the hero, right, we made his community the hero. And we said, so the advertisement now became energy. You sometimes you get it from each other, and sometimes you get it from this drink, right? And it is a very nicely crafted communication. So instead of, so we then stood out because it became a community based communication in a category where it was all individual need for energy. And that's how we changed the story around. But we learned from the first experience of trying to copy the category and finding out that we were not differentiated.
Often we see that happening, right? I mean, once a particular product has set the category code right, from colors to communication, you see everybody who's coming after that following the same thing because it has worked for someone, but that's not necessarily true.
No, yeah, and I think that in each category there's always an example. I would say us in banking, for example, I truly believe this, that we have a very uh, soft or right brain positioning in a category that's very left brain. So there is a lot of value in being uh, contrarian, because then it helps you stand out. The only thing is you need to be able to back it up, right? So if you say you're human and you're not, then obviously then the consumer calls you out.
How does this contrarian view, or does it at all translate to the media mix you end up using to popularize the brand?
I think it's fascinating that you asked that question, because in this industry, right, from whatever data I can see, we don't obviously know what everybody's spending on digital, but a lot of the money in this category is spent in print and in outdoors. And for somebody coming from a different industry, I found that quite bizarre. Uh, the other interesting thing about our category is that the number of advertisers is actually very, very high. So the top, let's say, 5 or 6 players did not contribute to more than 12 to 13% of the traditional advertising, right? So there is obviously, everybody has their own strategy. Uh, what we tend to do is we look at what can give us mass scale, and therefore the two most popular mediums for us are television and digital. uh, with the kind of reach today that digital can offer, these are the two big ones that we use from an above the line point of view. We obviously have a very strong performance team that's based out of our digital unit that drives intent marketing. But this is what we look at. So, and then depending on the cohort that we're talking to, so let's say we're talking to a senior citizen, then you might not so much use, uh, I would say, you might tend to skew your mix depending on who they are, right, and what they read and where they spend their time. Similarly, if you're advertising to a product that is meant for rural India, your media mix would be very different from, let's say, if you're advertising for credit cards. The card customer is about a lot more net savvy, and you would use a lot more of those tools, whereas for rural, you'd still depend a lot on TV along with digital and maybe some other formats for impact. So it really is a case to case basis. But in a category that's dominated by print and outdoors, we tend not to use those channels too much.
Okay. Can you give me a sense of, I mean, if you had to put a percentage on it, would you say 60-40 to television and digital? How would that be?
If I think if we include what we do on performance marketing, it'd probably be about 60 on digital, would be my sense, and about 30-35 on TV. The ratios between our above the line and performance need to be, healthy, because too much of one thing is, if you do too much above the line and don't do enough performance, then you're not capturing the demand that you've created at the top of the funnel. And if you're doing too much at the bottom of the funnel and you're not doing much above, then over a period of time, you'll see that your cost of acquisition starts going up for performance marketing, right? So maintaining that balance is important. Whether you do that balance for above the line using TV or digital is up to the product or the kind of messaging you want to drive, because the performance spends are always going to be digital, right? So they stay the way they are. And I think it really does depend on what you're trying to push.
Post-COVID, finfluencers have been influencing decisions of retail customers with regard to, how to save money, how to even, invest, etc. So what is it that you think banks and BFSI brands can learn from finfluencers?
So I think the great thing about this, and this reference is what I was saying about how the ecosystem of the digital ecosystem is changing the way we do marketing. So here are people that the consumers can actually rely on for information about products that otherwise they might have found difficult to do on their own. So I think that it's great for them. I think it also for marketeers gives us an avenue to learn, right? Because these are broadcasters in their own sense. They know their audience and they are communicating to that audience and what that audience needs. So, for example, we know that there are forums and influencers who are actually then dissecting what are the best cards to have. How do you maximize your benefits on those cards? So, if you're a product manager in cards or even a marketing person working in the credit card space, if you're part of those forums, you actually know what your consumer is interested in, what they're talking about. It can actually feed back into your card design, how you design the benefits, and how you market it, right? You could collaborate with these guys sometimes if you want to. I'm not sure there's always a reason to, but sometimes you could collaborate with them and even non-fin influencers, because in a way it might be difficult to collaborate with them because they have their own brand and they're trying to do what's best for their cohort. But there is definitely a lot to learn about how they pick up nuances and they're educating the consumer, which maybe in the past, I would say BFSI players have not done, mainly because we wanted to sell them something. But I think that the education part is happening, and it's good for the industry because a lot more people know about benefits of your products. A lot more people are actually able to learn about investing, for example. I think that's been a big trend. And as more and more people come into the formal economy, it helps people in the VFSI because our business grows. So there's a lot to learn, but I think it's also great for the overall industry and the economy.
Got it. Anand, since we are on trends, one thing I have to ask you about is generative AI. And just about 2 weeks ago, OpenAI even came out with the video generative AI bit, which is not yet open to everybody, but we have seen examples from OpenAI already about what that can do. What are conversations that you're having with your teams, with your agency partners, about using generative AI in communication? Where do you see the use of this the most? In what forms? Is it simply at the ideation level, or do you also think you will possibly just run an entire campaign that is generative AI led? Your thoughts?
So as an industry, we are a bit more cautious than others. We are in the business of trust. And I think one of the important things for us is that we don't use open market tools, right? Because we're concerned about if that could then potentially leak back our customers' information into the internet, etc. Right? So we work with only people that IT has certified in an ecosystem that's safe. So having said that, I think generative AI is here to stay. We are seeing a lot of use cases, mostly in the space of efficiency right now. So I'm not sure that we'll be seeing videos made by generative AI yet. But if there's a task that generative AI can do that would help free up the time of the teams, right, in the bank, in be it in marketing or otherwise, that's where I think we are seeing the use cases. Uh, we're piloting something internally to help the employees because we have a lot of information in the bank. So helping them process that information is one way we are doing it. We have, of course, uh, checked out some of the tools, and at this point in time, we're not as happy about the output that it's giving us as we should be. Having said that, I believe it's a question of time, right? So those conversations, and I'm sure, I'm sorry, I'm being a bit cagey in my answer. I think that it's a big opportunity, but we are a bit more cautious in how we let those tools come in and how we work with those. So I do think that it's going to change the way we do marketing. I do think that a lot of the use cases are efficiency led right now and not creative led. But as time goes forward, I think it will be the people who add it quickly to their toolkit are the ones who will benefit. Because again, like every other tool, this is the tool that's available to everybody in the ecosystem. So, uh, do we see currently any differentiation coming out of it? Because eventually everybody will have the tool. Probably no, but the first mover advantage will be there. So, really roundabout answer to your question. I hope I have answered it in some sense.
Very recently, Sudhir Sitapati at an industry event said something that stayed with me. So he basically said a brand should aim to be famous before it begins to persuade consumers. And the point he was making is that spend money on that brand building, and to do that, the CMO's best friend needs to be the CFO, and to not just look at this, as possibly and just an expense. So, your thoughts on, is this are CFOs today a lot more sympathetic towards the needs of CMO?
So first of all, I love our CFO, just putting it out there so that he gives me more money next time. But I don't know if it's so I do agree with the sentiment that he shared that brands need to be famous, because typically if you break down uh, any category statistically into one, two, three, and you compare the brand awareness, let's say the base of the pyramid as one, two, three, you'd normally find the same order as market share, right? That's now something that's proven. And therefore, if you have to drive your market share, you actually have to drive your mind share. Now, in that whole thing, you have to drive awareness and then you have to drive consideration. So I agree with what Sudhir is saying, that you have to be famous and then consumers will start considering you. Uh, whether the CFO is your best friend today or not, I'm not 100% sure. Again, because the way the business of marketing has changed, right? So if you are in a database company like I am, where we have first party data and we have a means to drive a lot of our journeys are digital as compared to, let's say, my previous experience where the products are not digital, right? So you'll have to actually walk into a shop and buy it, or buy it off an e-commerce platform. Uh, and that percentage is smaller. Here we have journeys that are end-to-end digital. And therefore, the business of marketing to a CFO that is visible, the ROIs are visible uh, in the base of the funnel, right? So I think your best friend is always data. Uh, and if data is your best friend, then you can convince the CFO, the CEO, whoever you want, saying that you're adding value. But I would think that right now, uh, marketers, because we are stuck in a bit of the traditional way of thinking, we have not been able to make that pitch saying that this is what I'm doing. And you need to have the ability to combine, like most things in today's world, connect the dots saying, this is what my above the line campaign is driving. This is how it is translating into middle of the funnel metrics. This is how it's translating into bottom of the funnel. And therefore, here's the business I delivered. So if you cannot show that, I do feel like there's a lot less sympathy for marketers rather than more from CFOs, because they're always focused on ROI, and if you're unable to explain the data connection to them, then you're unlikely to get the money.
Wrapping up, your parting thoughts for young marketers today. You have already mentioned, making data your best friend, maybe. What others should they keep in mind?
I don't want to be misquoted there. So I think data should be your best friend when you're talking to the CFO. But I think your ability to solve a problem. What marketing is finally about, solving problems, right? So you're given a business problem, you have to solve it with creativity. That's what our job is in marketing. And therefore, there is always room for intuition and the data informing the intuition and that cycle going on. There's nothing like knowing your consumer really well. If you have data, corroborate the data with real life experiences. If you have real life experience, corroborated with data. So I don't think it is one or the other. Marketing, as one of my previous bosses famously used to say, is an art and it's also a science. So I think acknowledging that and being able to play both parts of that is going to be critically important for all young marketers. So this is not rocket science, but if you're a first principle problem solver, you should be decent at marketing too. The only thing is you need to understand how the human mind works and how do you get your brand into the mind of a consumer who's just bombarded with a lot of information today.
Cool. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anoop. I have learned a lot from this, and I'm sure those who are viewing this too will have a lot of insightful takeaways. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure talking to you.